A 2-star general had me dragged off a training range in handcuffs for saving 57 of my soldiers. And about 3 weeks later, that same man stood up in a packed hearing room and demanded to know who gave the order that kept every last one of them breathing, not having the first clue he was about to hear my name. Before I take you out onto that range with me, let me just say it plain. I'm thankful you're here. You picking this one out of everything you could be listening to right now means more than you know. So do me this while you get settled in. Drop the name of your city down in the comments, wherever you're sitting, and I'll call you out by name in the next story. I read every single one of them. And if you've got it in you today, tap that like, hit that subscribe. That little bit is what lets somebody like me keep telling these. So, okay, let me take you back to that Tuesday, because you have to see how ordinary it all started, before it turned into the worst, and then the best week of my whole life. My name's Marisol. Everybody just called me Sergeant Solano, or Sergeant S if they were feeling brave. 16 years in the Army at that point. 16. I want you to hold on to that number, because when a man tries to take everything from you, that's the pile he's reaching for. 16 years, 4 years shy of my retirement, my whole adult life in that uniform. I was a sergeant first class stationed at Fort Cavazos, down in Killeen, Texas, out in the middle of that central Texas country, where the cedar and the live oak go on forever, and the summer heat sits on you like a wet coat. I was a platoon sergeant in an infantry battalion, but that summer I was running as the acting first sergeant for the company, because ours had gone down with a bad back. So on paper, I was in charge of the enlisted side of a whole company, about 130 soldiers. And on the day this all happened, 57 of them were mine on the ground, out on the range, and they were my responsibility down to the last one. Now, I loved the Army. I need you to understand that going in, because it makes the rest hurt the way it's supposed to. I came from nothing, a little town outside of Laredo, and the Army was the thing that made me somebody. I believed in the uniform. I believed rank meant something. I believed that when a man had 2 stars on his chest, he'd earned the right to make calls I couldn't. I believed all of that right up until the day I watched a general choose his own reputation over 57 human lives, and pick without even blinking. The general. Major General Roy Ashford. Division commander. Big man. Silver hair. The kind of jaw they put on recruiting posters. And a voice that filled a room whether or not he had anything worth saying. Everybody knew Ashford was up for his 3rd star. Everybody knew he was about 6 months from a Corps command somewhere, maybe a Pentagon slot after that. And everybody knew Roy Ashford would walk across your grave in a heartbeat to get there. That was just the man. He smiled like a car salesman, and he remembered exactly 2 kinds of people, the ones who could help his career and the ones who couldn't. I was the second kind. Okay, so here's the setup. That week we had a big live fire demonstration on the schedule. And I mean big. Ashford had a congressional delegation flying in, 3 or 4 members of Congress and their staffers, plus some defense contractor types, because the division was trying to justify a whole pile of money for new equipment, and Ashford wanted to put on a show. Tanks, Bradleys, dismounts, tracer fire at dusk, the whole thing choreographed like a 4th of July special. He'd been talking about it for weeks. This was his moment. This was the day Roy Ashford earned his 3rd star in front of the people who signed the checks. And the thing about Central Texas in the middle of July, the thing anybody who's ever spent a summer down there will tell you, is that it is dry as a bone, and it burns. Grass fires on the ranges are just a fact of life at Cavazos. You put enough tracer rounds and enough hot brass into dead grass in 104-degree heat with a wind at your back, and something is going to catch. It happens. Everybody knows it happens. There are fire breaks and water trucks and range control watching for exactly that reason. That morning, the National Weather Service put out a red flag warning for the whole region. Red flag means critical fire conditions, low humidity, high wind, everything primed to go up. On top of that, the county was already under a burn ban. Our own range safety people flagged it. I heard it on the net myself. 7:40 in the morning. Range control reading off the warning. Wind out of the southwest, gusting to 30. And you know what came down from division? Continue as planned. The demonstration goes forward. General's intent. I remember standing at the back of my formation that morning with my stomach already turning, and I told myself, okay, they know more than you, Solano. They've got water trucks staged, range controls watching, stay in your lane. I told myself that. I want you to hear that I told myself to trust them, because I did. We rolled out to the training area mid-afternoon. My 57 were the dismounted element, the infantry piece, and our part of the show came in a couple of iterations. Between iterations, we staged in a low area, kind of a shallow draw off the range road, down in a bowl, where a seasonal creek ran when it rained, which that summer was never. Dry as a parking lot. One gravel road, in and out. I did not love that spot the second I saw it, because it was low and it was boxed in, and there was exactly one way out. But that's where the plan put us. So that's where we were, sitting on our rucks, drinking warm water, waiting for our next go while the armor did their thing about a mile off. The VIP stand, where Ashford and his congressmen and his contractors were all sitting under a nice shade canopy with cold drinks, was up on a rise a good ways behind us with a clean view of the whole range. The armor iteration kicked off around 5:30, and it was loud and it was beautiful. Tracers arcing out gold across that dead brown range in the falling light, and the congressmen were probably eating it up. And about 10 minutes into it, off on the far tree line, I saw the smoke. Little at first, a gray smudge maybe 800 meters out past the impact area, and I thought, there it is, grass fire. They'll knock it down. They did not knock it down. That wind, that 30-mile-an-hour southwest wind, the Weather Service had warned everybody about at 7:40 that morning, took that little gray smudge, and inside of about 4 minutes, it was a wall. I'm not exaggerating for you. If you have never watched a grass fire run with the wind behind it in July in Texas, you cannot picture how fast it moves. It does not creep. It runs. It came off that tree line and jumped the first fire break, like the fire break wasn't even there. And it started coming across the range straight at the draw, where my 57 kids were sitting on their rucks with one gravel road out. I got on the net. I called range control. I called battalion. I said, we've got fire crossing the eastern break, moving fast toward training area. I need to move my element now. And here is where I want you to really listen, because this is the part that changed my whole life. The word that came back over the net was hold. Hold your position. The demonstration is still in progress. Range control has the fire. Do not move. Do not disrupt the iteration. And I knew that voice. That was not range control. That was coming down from the observation post. That was the general shop. I looked up at that fire. It had crossed the second break by then. I could feel the heat change on my face, and I could smell it. That thick grass smoke smell. And the wind was steady on my back, pushing it right at us, and I could see with my own 2 eyes that, in about 6 or 7 minutes, that draw we were sitting in was going to be the inside of a furnace, with one road out that the fire would reach before we could all walk it. I keyed the net one more time. I said, be advised, I have fire inbound on my position. I am evacuating my element to the hardball road. Now. The answer came back, and this time it was not range control, and it was not battalion. It was a voice I knew, an aide, one of Ashford's people. And behind him you could hear the man himself, and the word was negative. Negative, Sergeant. You will hold. You are disrupting a division-level event. Maintain your position. That is a direct order from the commanding general. A direct order from a 2-star over an open net in front of the United States Congress. And I stood there for about 1 full second, and in that second, I saw the whole thing. I saw that if I obeyed that order and it went bad, they'd bury me in the paperwork and it wouldn't matter. And I saw that if I disobeyed it and I was wrong, they'd end my career. And I saw 57 faces looking at me, Tran and Ruiz and Delacroix, and this 18-year-old private named Kowalski who'd been in the Army for 4 months, all of them looking at their acting first sergeant to tell them what to do. So I made the call. I stood up on the hood of the nearest truck, and I put my whole chest into it, and I yelled the order to move. Everybody up, everybody on the trucks, leave the rucks, leave everything. Get on the road, heading north. Go, go, go. And to their credit, to their everlasting credit, those kids moved. 16 years of training kicked in, and they moved like a machine, and we crammed onto the vehicles, and the ones that didn't fit ran alongside, and we came up out of that draw, and onto the gravel, and north onto the hardball road. And I was the last one out, standing in the back of the last truck counting heads, 1 through 57, all 57, screaming at the driver to go. We got maybe 600 meters up the road, and I turned around, and I watched that fire pour into the draw we had been sitting in, like water filling a bathtub. The whole bowl went up at once. Where my company had been sitting on their rucks 90 seconds before was a solid sheet of orange. It ran right over our position, over the rucks, over everything, right over the road we'd driven out on. If we had held, if I had obeyed that order, there is not one soul in that draw that lives. Not one. 57 soldiers. Gone. Over a photo op for a congressman. Specialist Tran, this quiet kid from Houston, he had his phone out in the back of the truck next to me, and he filmed the whole thing. The fire going into the draw. Remember Tran's phone. It comes back, and it's the most important phone in this entire story. So there we are, up on the hardball, everybody alive, some of them puking from the smoke and the run, and I'm shaking. And honestly, there's a part of me that's already thinking, okay, I just disobeyed a general on an open net, but they're alive, and no reasonable human being on the face of the earth is going to look at that black draw and tell me I did the wrong thing. I was so naive. I really was. Because about 20 minutes later, once the fire trucks finally got there and the whole thing was being sorted out, and we were accounted for, and safe, an MP HMMWV came up that road with its lights going, and 2 military police got out, and they came straight to me. And one of them, this young specialist who would not meet my eyes, said, "Sergeant Solano, I need you to come with us, ma'am." And I said, "Come with you where?" And he said, "You're being detained by order of the commanding general." Detained. I had just pulled 57 soldiers out of a fire that would have killed every one of them, and Roy Ashford's answer, before the smoke had even cleared, was to have me arrested in front of my own troops. They didn't cuff me right there, not in front of the kids, I'll give them that. But they walked me to that Humvee with a hand on my arm like I was a criminal, and my soldiers watched their first sergeant get taken away, and I could see it on their faces, that confusion, that what is happening, and I could not say a word to them because what was I even going to say? They drove me back to Garrison, and it was there, in a little room in the Provost Marshal's office, that they read it to me. General Ashford was preferring court-martial charges, willful disobedience of a superior commissioned officer. That's Article 90. That's the big one that can send you to prison, plus dereliction, plus creating a dangerous situation. And here's the part that made my blood go cold. The way they'd written it up, I was the villain. According to the general's version, the fire had been contained, range control had it handled, and I had panicked, disobeyed direct orders, and caused a reckless, unauthorized mass evacuation that stampeded soldiers onto a road and could have gotten people killed. I had endangered my soldiers, they said. Me, by pulling them out of the fire, he flipped it. You understand? He took the exact thing I did to save them, and he told the world I'd done it to hurt them. And he had 2 stars and a congressional audience, and I had 16 years and no stars at all. That first night, sitting in my empty apartment on restriction, not allowed to talk to my own soldiers, my whole career hanging by a thread. I'm not going to lie to you, I broke. I sat on my kitchen floor and I cried like I hadn't cried since basics. 16 years. 4 years from a pension. And a man was going to take it all because I'd embarrassed him in front of some congressman. And then, somewhere around 2 in the morning, I stopped crying. And I got mad. And I want to tell you about that, because that's when this story stops being about a fire and starts being about a reckoning. The next morning, I got assigned to defense counsel from Trial Defense Service, and thank God, they sent me Captain Nia Okonkwo. Now, if you've ever met a lawyer who is quiet and calm and absolutely terrifying to anyone on the other side of them, that was Okonkwo. She came into that room. She set down one folder. She looked at me and she said, "Sergeant, walk me through it. Every second of it." And I did. When I got to the part about the net, about the order to hold, about the general's own voice telling me negative, she stopped writing. She looked up, and she said, real quiet, "The radio traffic on a division net is recorded. Range control logs everything. There is a recording of a 2-star general ordering 57 soldiers to sit still inside a fire." And I said, "Yeah, there is." She smiled just a little, and she said, "Then we're going to be fine. We were not going to be fine. Not for a while. Because that's not how these things go, and this is where it gets ugly. This is the first wave of them trying to bury me." Within about 2 days, the story around the base had already been shaped. And it wasn't my story. Ashford's people were fast. The narrative was that a hysterical NCO had panicked and disobeyed orders during a controlled event. And thank goodness no one was hurt. But her recklessness was under investigation. They opened an AR-15-6, an investigation, and the officer they appointed to run it was a lieutenant colonel who owed his whole career to Ashford. You see how that works. The Fox investigating the henhouse. And then the witnesses started to wobble. My company had a young platoon leader, Lieutenant Pace, brand new butter bar, 23 years old, scared to death. When the investigating officer brought him in, Pace's statement came out saying he thought the fire had been a good distance off and that the evacuation had been chaotic and maybe unnecessary. Now Pace was on that road with the rest of us. Pace saw that draw go up same as I did, but a lieutenant colonel who works for the general is asking you questions and hinting your career depends on the answers, and a 23-year-old kid folds. I don't even fully blame him, but it hurt. God, it hurt, because I'd have walked into that fire for that kid. And then the radio recording, the one thing Okonkwo said would save me. The range control net recording from that afternoon. It was gone. Missing. Range control said there'd been some kind of equipment issue. The recording for that window was corrupted. Unavailable. Just poof. The one recording in the whole United States Army that had a general ordering soldiers to hold their position in a fire, and it developed a technical problem. I remember when Okonkwo told me that. I remember thinking, that's it. They've got me. It's my word against a 2-star and a lieutenant who already caved and an investigation run by his golfing buddy. I was cooked. That was the lowest I got. Lower than the kitchen floor. because on the kitchen floor, I still thought the truth would save me. Now the truth was disappearing on purpose, and there wasn't a thing I could do. But here's the thing about people who are used to getting away with everything. They get sloppy. They think they've thought of everything, and they never have. Two things they didn't think of. The first one was Tran. I mentioned Specialist Tran filmed the fire going into the draw from the back of that last truck. What Ashford's people didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, was that this quiet kid from Houston had, out of just pure habit, been live-streaming little bits of the whole afternoon to a group chat with his buddies back home. And his phone had a timestamp on everything. And in that video, clear as day, you can hear it. You can hear me on the net calling the fire in. You can hear the order come back to hold. And then, and this is the part, in the background of Tran's own video, you can hear the general's voice on the radio, tinny but unmistakable, saying, "Negative. You will hold. That is a direct order from the commanding general." And then you watch the fire eat the draw. Tran came to Okonkwo on his own. Nobody made him. This 19-year-old kid walked into the TDS office and put his phone on the table and said, "Sergeant Solano saved my life, and I've got it right here." And the second thing they didn't think of, the range control net doesn't just record at range control. There's a redundant backup recorder at the control tower on the far side of the impact area, a completely separate system, because the Army does not trust one recorder for exactly this kind of situation. Whoever scrubbed the primary recording either didn't know about the backup or figured nobody would think to pull it. Okonkwo thought to pull it. She filed for it through the right channels before anybody could touch it. And there it was, the entire net. Every word, time-stamped. The general of the United States Army Division ordering 57 soldiers to sit still in the path of a wildfire so he wouldn't have to interrupt a show. Now watch what happens. This is the wave turning. Because once Okonkwo had that backup recording, she did not run to the general's tame investigating officer with it. She was smarter than that. She took it up the chain, over Ashford's head, to the Corps commander, the 3-star, Lieutenant General Ruiz, a man who did not owe Roy Ashford one single thing, and who, as it turned out, could not stand him. And when the Corps commander sat in his office and listened to that recording, and heard a 2-star order soldiers to die for a photo op, and then heard that the primary recording had gone conveniently missing, that man's whole face changed, because now it wasn't just about me. Now it was about a general who tried to kill soldiers through his own arrogance and then tampered with evidence to cover it. Now it was about the integrity of the whole thing. Corps commander pulled the 15-6 out of Ashford's cronies' hands that same day and appointed a real investigating officer, a colonel from a different command, with no dog in the fight. And he brought in CID, the criminal investigators, to find out who scrubbed that primary recording. And oh, when CID started pulling on that thread, because somebody had to have gone into that system and deleted that window. And CID does this for a living. They pulled the access logs on the range control recording system and the metadata, and it took them about a day and a half to trace exactly whose credentials were used to access and delete that recording the morning after the fire. It was Ashford's aide-de-camp, a captain named Sorensen, the general's own golden boy, the one who'd carried his bag and read the burn ban warning and probably tossed it in the trash. Sorensen had gone in and scrubbed the recording, and he'd done it on his own account like an idiot, and CID had him cold. Now I want to walk you through the reckoning, because this is what you've been waiting for, and I am going to give it to you exactly the way it happened. In that hearing room, in public, in front of everybody. They convened an Article 32 hearing. That's the pre-trial hearing that decides whether a court-martial goes forward. Except by now the question wasn't really whether I was going to be court-martialed. Okonkwo had made sure the Corps commander had the backup recording and Tran's video before that hearing ever started. The real purpose of that room, though nobody said it out loud, was to let Roy Ashford walk in still thinking he was the one on offense. And he did. He walked in there in his Class A uniform with all his ribbons and his 2 stars. And he had that jaw up, and he sat down like he owned the room, because for his whole life he had owned every room. His toady, the battalion commander who'd pressured Pace, a lieutenant colonel named Boland, sat right behind him. Sorensen the aide was there too, not knowing yet that CID was about 90 minutes from ending his life. And they ran through the general's version first, the contained fire, the panicked sergeant, the reckless evacuation. And Ashford, when it was his turn, he got up and he performed. He talked about good order and discipline. He talked about the danger of an NCO who thinks she knows better than her chain of command. He was so sure. And then he did the thing that ended him. He turned, and he addressed the room. And in this booming, confident voice, building his case that the evacuation had been reckless and unauthorized, he said, "I want this on the record. I want to know exactly who took it upon themselves to override my authority and move those soldiers. I want to know who gave that order. Whoever saved them, as they seem so proud to say, did it in direct defiance of the chain of command, and I want their name in this record. Who saved them?" He said it like a weapon. He said it like the answer was going to hang somebody. And Captain Okonkwo stood up, and she was so calm, and she said, "General, we'd be happy to answer that." And she asked the investigating officer for permission to play a recording, and Ashford, God, he actually smiled, because he still thought the recording was gone. He thought his aide had made sure of it, so he had no idea what was coming. And he said, "By all means." And she played the backup net recording. The whole room. And you heard my voice call the fire. And you heard the order come back to hold. And then, filling that silent hearing room, you heard Roy Ashford's own voice, his voice, big and unmistakable, say, "Negative. You will hold. That is a direct order from the commanding general." And then Okonkwo played Tron's video right after, the fire pouring into the draw, the exact ground he'd ordered them to hold, going up like the mouth of hell. Nobody breathed. I watched the color leave that man's face in real time. I watched Roy Ashford understand, in front of 2 members of Congress who'd come back for the hearing, in front of the Corps commander, in front of the assembled brass, that he had just personally asked out loud, on the record, who saved those 57 soldiers. And the answer was the sergeant he'd had arrested. The answer was that they were only alive because somebody disobeyed him. He'd asked who saved them, and the recording answered, "They were saved from you." Then it came apart all at once, the way it does when the wall breaks. Lieutenant Pace, the kid who'd folded, he asked to make a new statement. He stood up, and his voice was shaking, and he looked right at me, and he said he'd been afraid, and that his first statement wasn't true, and that Sergeant Solano's call was the only reason he was alive to be standing there. 23 years old. Found his spine in that room. I forgave him the second he opened his mouth. The Corps commander, Ruiz, he'd had enough. He didn't wait for the hearing to wrap. He announced, right there, that all charges against me were withdrawn, effective immediately. And then he turned to Ashford. And in front of that entire room, in front of the congressman, he relieved Major General Roy Ashford of command of the division. On the spot, told him to consider himself relieved for cause-pending investigation into reckless endangerment and evidence tampering. His 3rd star, the Corps command, the Pentagon slot, the whole shining future, gone in one sentence in a room full of witnesses. The man who walked in owning the room got walked out of it. And Boland, the toady battalion commander who leaned on Pace to lie, the Corps commander, wasn't done. Boland got relieved too. Career over. A permanent letter in his file that meant he'd never command anything again. And Sorensen, the aide, Remember I said CID was about 90 minutes out. They were waiting when the hearing broke. They took him into custody right there in the hallway outside for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. And the last I saw of Captain Sorensen, he was being walked out of that building by 2 agents, white as a sheet, his career and probably his freedom gone, all for scrubbing a recording to protect a man who would not have crossed the street for him. Every single one of them, on screen, as it were, right in front of me. I got to watch every one of them go down. Now I told you I don't do gratuitous. And I didn't. I never said a word against any of them in that room. I didn't have to. I just sat there and let the truth do it. Because the truth, when you finally get it in front of the right people, is heavier than anything I could ever say. And here's the part I sit with the most. That evening, after all of it, they let me go back to my company. And I walked into the company area, and my soldiers were there, all 57 of them plus the rest, and word had already gotten around about what happened in that room. And nobody said much. Kowalski, the 18-year-old, the 4-month private, he just walked up and hugged me, which is not really a thing you do to your first sergeant, and I let him. And I stood there in the middle of my soldiers, and I finally let myself breathe, all the way down, for the first time in 3 weeks, and my shoulders came down from around my ears. And I realized I'd been holding my whole body clenched since the second those MPs put a hand on my arm. I went home that night to that same apartment where I'd cried on the kitchen floor, and it was so quiet. And I made myself a cup of coffee at 9 at night for no reason, and I sat at that kitchen table, and I was just light. Empty in the good way. 57 kids were going to go home to their mothers, and I was still a soldier. They gave me the Soldier's Medal a few months later, which is the award they give for risking your own life to save others when there's no enemy shooting at you, the highest honor you can get for that. I'm proud of it. I won't pretend I'm not. But I'll tell you the truth, that medal isn't the thing I think about. The thing I think about is that draw, black and smoking, and how close the whole world came to going a different way over one man who could not stand to have his show interrupted. Roy Ashford retired quietly a while later, at a reduced rank, under investigation. No ceremony, no cannons, no 3rd star. He got to keep his life, which, if you think about it, is more than he was willing to give 57 of mine. So here's where I'll leave you, and I'm not going to dress it up, because there's nothing pretty about how close it got. They will tell you your whole life to trust the people above you, to sit down, to hold your position, to let the folks with more rank and more stars make the call. And most days that's fine. Most days, those people have earned it. But every now and then, you are going to be the one standing in the low ground, watching something come that the people up on the hill can't feel on their own skin. And they are going to tell you to hold. And in that second, it is going to cost you everything to move. Your job, your name, 16 years, all of it. And you are going to have to decide who you actually work for. And I'm here to tell you, after everything, I work for the 57. I always did. I just didn't know until the day it cost me to prove it. If you're ever standing in that draw, and you can feel the heat on your face, while somebody safe and far away tells you it's fine, you move your people. You move them, and you let the rank sort itself out after. It will. And even if it doesn't, you'll still get to be the person who moved them. And some nights, that's the only thing that lets you sleep.